I want to turn to a recent column in the Irish Examiner by Victoria White, in which she argued that it's ironic that People Before Profit organised a demonstration against the new US President Donald Trump, because just like Trump, she said the BPP supports taking politics out of traditional democratic structures. For more on this, we're joined in studio by Victoria White and indeed by Richard Boyd Barrett, the People Before Profit TD from Dunleary. You're both very welcome. Victoria, just for those who haven't read your column, just sum up the main argument you set out in that column, if you will.
Well, the main argument was on foot of an interview that Richard, beside me, conducted on RTE with also Ruth Carpenter, in which he described, pressed by Brian Dowling, he described the Dáil as a platform, but not a platform from which you can actually create a movement for mass action, but that mass action on the streets is where the real issues get solved. So the Dáil is not, as he described it, the be-all and end-all, but it is actually a platform. So there's also, what there is in that is the kind of demonisation of, the traditional people, the elites or whatever are in the Dáil and they're talking to each other. But the real people are on the streets. And now, what they are there from either side of the political divide, but what Trump is saying is that he actually said it at his speech on Friday, I am going to take the power away from Washington and give it to you, the people. So I think that the best way of giving power to the people is to give them a vote.
Okay. Richard Boyd Barrett, how do you respond to that?
Well, I regret to say that I think that article written by Victoria is really a scurrilous, inaccurate, dishonest.
Let's not get personal. Let's respond. I asked you to respond to the argument.
No, because it is personal. For Victoria to liken us to Trump, or as the headline suggested, to talk about us being a threat to democracy, is an absolutely disgraceful slur.
Okay.
And she says, I'll just point you out how inaccurate it is. At one point she says the only difference between Trump and the left is that the left are generally not racist. Now that is a completely inaccurate statement, unless Victoria knows nothing about our politics. We campaign for LGBT rights and women's rights. We campaign for workers' rights. Trump is against all of those things. We campaign for the wealthy to pay more taxes. Trump wants them to pay less taxes. You did say.
I said the left and the right. I didn't say
Victoria,
you and Trump.
You said the only difference. Read it out.
But
the only difference. So you're not going to read it out, Shane.
No, because I want you to deal with the question that I actually asked you, which is Victoria's point that like Trump, you regard representative politics as just a start. I mean, your quote is, which I will read out, is electoral politics were part of it, but not the be all and the end all. So, would you address that point that Victoria made?
Yeah. The original movement for democracy was called the Chartist movement, and the Chartist movement campaigned for far more democracy than the limited vote every 4 or 5 years that we get, right? So we would fight to the death to defend the little bits of democracy that we have, including, by the way, the right to protest, which is a very important part of our right to democracy. Something I don't think Trump is in favour of, by the way. And all the protests we saw at the weekend, including some organised by ourselves, were against Trump, and he would be very hostile to that type of thing. But what we think is we need more democracy, not less. Trump is the antithesis of that. And that's why it's absolutely outrageous for Victoria to suggest there's any commonality whatsoever between ourselves and Trump. The truth is we are for a more thoroughgoing democracy, as were the original people who fought for democracy. They believed in annual parliaments, the Chartists. They believed in recallability for public representatives who made promises and broke them, like successive governments have done. They believed that the public representatives should be on wages similar to those that they represented. Mm-hmm. Okay. All of the things we
let Victoria come back in. Richard's point is they're in favour of more democracy, not less democracy.
Well, I mean, I think that the best way to achieve more democracy is through democracy, if you want. I mean, I certainly think there are huge advances that could be made and that could be tried. I think probably the greatest democratic deficit in Ireland is local politics. And, there have been experiments such as participatory democracy in Brazil, in certain cities in Brazil, and in actually certain US cities as well, where actual citizens themselves have a tiny proportion who've bothered to do it, have apportioned the budget themselves directly. I think that certainly there are many advances that could be made within this democracy. However, this democracy is not one that deserves to be torn down, because we are actually number 6 in the world under the UN Development Index, and we're number 17 in all the countries of the world for corruption. Now, I'd like us to be in the top 10 with the Denmarks or whatever, but we're not. This is not
you
a
also
corrupt
asked a question
banana republic.
We also asked raised a question in your piece about, Richard makes a point about a mass movement of ordinary people, and you say, are we to understand that ordinary people don't vote, that they march?
Yeah, I'm not actually just talking about Richard and about Trump. It's not the Punch and Judy that it's being made out to be. But what I'm saying is that this continual narrative that the real people, that there are people who are real and people who are unreal, and the real people are the people who tend to agree with whoever's their mouthpiece at the particular time. We had a spokesperson for Home Sweet Home saying that the judgment against them had been as a result of the fact that the judge was a member of the elite. So, I think that's too simplistic, because we actually do live in a representative democracy, and there are no unreal people. And politicians are very available.
First of all, I or people before profit have never ever used the phrase real people or made distinctions between real and unreal people. So that's just slanderous nonsense. Quite the contrary. We campaign in elections. We take elections very, very seriously. But we do believe there is a massive democratic deficit, and that a vote every 5 years is not adequate, and that civil society mobilisation, people power, whatever you want to call it, is critical in order to hold.
I suppose the question to that
in order to hold governments.
I suppose the question to that, Richard,
to account.
How is you're absolutely right that people have a right to protest.
They've more than a right. They have an obligation.
But the point is, how is that more democratic than casting a vote?
Who said it, who claimed it was more democratic?
But isn't there a danger as well with protest that a small number of vocal people can dictate the agenda? Whereas with an election, you have everybody who has the right to vote casting their vote. That's surely a more accurate barometer.
Well, first of all, you don't actually. You have about 60% of people voting.
Everyone has the right
in
to
the
vote.
United States, you have about 50%. And of course, the reason that numbers voting has reduced significantly is because people feel, with a fair cause, I think, that often successive governments, there's no real policy change, despite the fact that people vote for policy change, because politicians make promises before elections and then go and break them. And of course, the electorate can do nothing about this. So that is the reason we believe you need recallability, you need more participatory forms of democracy, you need to be able to hold politicians to account, which currently you're not able to do, and that is why people power is critically important. And it's very worth saying, the reason we have the franchise in the first place is because of a mass popular movement of civil disobedience, the Chartist movement and subsequently the suffragette movement. And the reason we have an independent state where you have the right to vote in this country is because there was a mass popular revolutionary movement.
So permanent
in
revolution,
this country.
is that what you're saying?
What I am saying is that the right to protest is an absolutely critical and indispensable. Yeah, you suggest it is,
no,
and
I don't.
You counterpose
okay, you make your point,
in
and
your
then Victoria
article,
can come in.
Representative democracy with protest, suggesting that if you engage in the politics of people power, that somehow you're hostile to democracy, which is nonsense.
Okay.
Dishonest. That's what your article says.
Just address
Victoria.
that point then to finish.
Of course,
Victoria.
I'm not against protest. I actually say that protest is important. Of course, it is. Very important that protest should be not only allowed, but obviously facilitated. There's no, and that happens in this country.
But Richard's point about people getting elected and then breaking their promises, and
it's absolutely true.
Protest being a way of addressing that and holding politicians to account.
Yes, it is absolutely true, but that's not to say that we have an entire Dáil Éireann full of corrupt, politicians whose first thing they want to do is to break every promise. That that is not true. It is true that there is slippage, and that there are many mechanisms that we can evolve within our democracy to actually address. We don't have, for a start, fixed 5-year terms. Very likely we will not have very long left in this government, and we are a very representative democracy. We have great access to our politicians. So ultimately, I would encourage people to be involved in democratic politics in this country, because the ordinary person in this country can be elected.
All right.
That's exactly what we do, Victoria, is involve people in politics. And one of the key ways you do that is precisely by campaigning on issues, including through mobilisation on the streets in between elections.
Okay. All right. We have to leave it there. Richard Boyd Barrett and Victoria White, thanks to both of you for coming in to us this morning.